Just picture this for a moment. A handful of cracked clay tablets, thousands of years old, suddenly beginning to reveal things that could shake the very foundations of human history. That is precisely the claim that has been making waves lately. Artificial intelligence, it is said, has managed to piece together and decode fragments of ancient Sumerian tablets that scholars had been unable to fully interpret for well over 100 years. These are the very same mysterious tablets that were unearthed from the ruins of ancient Mesopotamia. Many of them were shattered, many were missing large sections, and some had spent years sitting forgotten in the back rooms of museum storage facilities. Then, in 2025, newly developed AI translation models began stitching thousands of scattered pieces together. What that process uncovered left a great many people genuinely stunned. Some argue these are nothing but old mythological tales, while others insist these writings hold references to the origins of humankind, divine beings, puzzling technology, and secrets that perhaps were never intended to reach the outside world. But the question that sits at the center of all this is a simple one. What exactly did artificial intelligence uncover that has reignited one of the most hotly debated conversations in all of recorded history? We will get into all of that shortly, but first, make sure you are subscribed to the channel. Thousands of years back, at a time when most corners of the world had not yet developed any real system of writing, the Sumerians of Mesopotamia were already carefully pressing information onto clay tablets. Over the centuries, thousands of those tablets were swallowed by the earth and stayed hidden away from the rest of the world for a very long time. Eventually, archaeologists brought these remarkable tablets back to light while excavating the ruins of the ancient cities of Eridu and Nippur. In the beginning, most people assumed the tablets contained little more than old religious narratives or royal record-keeping. Gradually, however, it began to dawn on researchers that the full story might run far deeper than anyone had initially thought. The real challenge was that these tablets were inscribed in cuneiform, one of the oldest writing systems ever known to exist on this earth. Deciphering it was an extraordinarily demanding task. The very same symbol might carry entirely different meanings depending on where it appeared. A great many words had no real counterpart in modern languages. On top of all that, a significant number of tablets had been shattered. In certain cases, half a line would simply be gone, while in others, whole sections had been wiped out entirely. Many of these records sat in museum storage rooms for years on end. Some had been mislabeled, while others were never considered significant enough to deserve a closer look. Scholars devoted their whole lives to trying to make sense of these writings, yet their greatest obstacle was that they could only ever work with tiny pieces. Nobody had the full picture. Then, around 2025, things began to shift. New artificial intelligence translation models emerged, ones that had been trained across thousands of Sumerian, Akkadian, and Babylonian texts. The AI was not simply converting words from one language to another. It was identifying patterns, filling in missing symbols, and drawing connections between records from entirely separate civilizations. Where human researchers had only ever seen scattered fragments, the AI began uncovering hidden links among them. When artificial intelligence started stitching together thousands of those dispersed pieces of Sumerian tablets, something surfaced that left many people genuinely taken aback. For centuries, the widely held belief had been that humanity came into existence only once. Whether in ancient narratives or religious traditions, the origin of humans was almost always framed as a single, solitary event. But these tablets appeared to be telling quite a different story. During the course of the AI analysis, several texts turned up that used distinct and separate terms to refer to humans. At first, this might not seem particularly unusual, but once those terms were placed alongside other records, a strange pattern started to take shape. It appeared as though not all humans were regarded in the same light. Certain groups were described in noticeably different ways, and the roles assigned to them differed as well. In several passages, phrases were found that translated roughly to something along the lines of working life. Elsewhere, there were references to something called low-light clay. Yet another puzzling phrase was interpreted as meaning those who do not multiply. At first, these expressions were regarded by scholars as nothing more than poetic language. But once AI detected them appearing repeatedly across various tablets, the picture began to shift in a rather different direction. Certain researchers now believe these descriptions could point to early human groups that were brought into existence for very particular purposes. If that reading holds up, it would imply that some of the earliest humans were fashioned purely to carry out labor. They were never meant to grow into lasting populations, but were instead used more like temporary work units. Even more striking, certain texts make mention of groups that eventually vanished. It almost gives the impression that some versions simply did not work out as intended. They were replaced, set aside, or newer versions were brought in to take their place. Human creation, as portrayed here, was not a single moment, but rather a process that moved through several distinct stages. If this reading of the tablets turns out to be accurate, the whole picture is transformed entirely. Humans did not emerge all at once, but instead arrived at their present form following many rounds of trial and adjustment. And this is precisely where the most pressing question surfaces. If various kinds of humans were brought into being, what was the reason behind that need? Which naturally leads to yet another question. Why were these differing human types created to begin with? As AI went on linking more and more fragments of the Sumerian tablets together, a fresh and genuinely fascinating pattern started to take shape. It appeared that these ancient writings did not treat humans as one unified group. Rather, they described humanity as falling into separate and distinct categories. This would explain why so many tablets draw on different names and labels when referring to humans. Among all of these, two terms stand out and attract the greatest attention: Salfun, i.e. Anansor, and now Lulu and Sagiga. For quite a long time, scholars treated both as general words simply meaning humans. But once AI began comparing the contexts in which they appeared across different tablets, some notable distinctions started to come through. The word Lulu appears across numerous sources referring to ordinary human beings, while Giga was rendered by certain scholars years back as the black-haired people. Initially, this did not draw a great deal of attention. However, once AI examined hundreds of records all at once, that term kept showing up alongside particular roles. Certain texts describe individuals who were diligent, compliant, and carried out their duties without raising any questions. Some researchers have linked these descriptions to the concept of entirely obedient workers. The most striking details come from lines that speak of people whose eyes never questioned anything. Many regard this as nothing more than a symbolic phrase, yet others feel it might be describing a completely submissive group, people who simply performed their assigned tasks and never pushed back against the established order. The tablets also refer to distinct roles belonging to different groups. Certain groups are tied to labor and building work, some to religious functions, and others to matters of administration. Beyond that, a handful of texts even seem to hint at varying physical characteristics and appearances among these groups. This is precisely why some researchers attempt to read them as early classifications of humankind. Still, these interpretations remain a subject of ongoing debate, and no definitive conclusion has yet been arrived at. One thing, however, stands out clearly. These tablets do not portray humans as one uniform and identical group. Rather, they lay out different roles, different identities, and different kinds of people altogether. Eden. Could this have been the very first designated human working zone? As AI kept linking more and more fragments of the Sumerian tablets together, references to a location known as Eden or Eden began surfacing time and again. Many people might instantly picture the biblical Garden of Eden upon hearing that name, but these ancient records describe it in a noticeably different light. Here it is not portrayed simply as a lush and beautiful garden, but rather as something closer to a dedicated working region. According to the tablets, this particular area was situated between two rivers, and that is why certain researchers have drawn connections to the fertile lowlands of Mesopotamia. But perhaps the most striking detail is that several of these texts describe this location as a place where new human groups were formed and then put through trials. Some of these records explain that once a group had been created, it was subjected to a test. If it carried out its assigned function successfully, it received a name and was directed toward a particular role. Yet not every one of these attempts turned out well. A number of texts mention groups that simply did not meet what was expected of them. This is the point where some genuinely puzzling details begin to surface. Certain writings describe people who were sent into the rivers or swept away by them. Other records speak of groups directed toward the mountains, after which they vanish entirely from the written accounts. To this day, nobody truly understands what these descriptions are meant to convey. They could simply be symbolic expressions. But when artificial intelligence cross-referenced different tablets with one another, these same events kept showing up repeatedly. Because of this pattern, some researchers have begun to seriously discuss what is called the human prototype theory. According to this line of thinking, these texts may be pointing toward different versions of humanity or early experimental stages. Some proved successful, some did not, and some may have been erased from the historical record entirely. While there is no firm evidence supporting this reading, going through these records does leave a strong impression that Eden was far more than simply a place of dwelling. It seems to have been the center of a much greater purpose, where new groups were brought into existence, evaluated, and then dispatched in various directions. This brings us to the moment when Enki is said to have made changes to humanity. The account of the alleged trials carried out in Eden does not conclude there. According to certain interpretations of the Sumerian tablets, the early human groups were confronted with a serious difficulty. They were capable of labor, but they had no ability to grow their own numbers. Every new group needed to be produced from scratch all over again. If the size of a group dropped too low, it had to be fully recreated. The whole framework was growing sluggish and increasingly hard to manage. Certain texts carry hints suggesting that these early human beings may have had restrictions placed on their ability to bring new individuals into existence. Put simply, they were unable to generate others like themselves. Some researchers see this as a form of a control mechanism. The way they explain it, if everything was intended to stay under firm control, then the capacity to grow the population would also have to remain in the hands of those at the top. Yet gradually, this arrangement appears to have lost its effectiveness. The tablets offer no clear reason why, but various passages point to the older versions no longer being sufficient. There was an increasing demand for beings who were more capable, sharper in mind, and more resilient. This is where the name Enki starts to surface in the narrative. Within Sumerian tradition, Enki is recognized as the deity of wisdom and deep knowledge. According to certain readings of these texts, Enki chose to introduce alterations to the human design. Readers today often draw comparisons between this idea and genetic modification, even though that phrase never appears in the ancient records. Still, the texts do describe shifts that appear to elevate human capabilities considerably. These newly shaped humans are portrayed as far more intelligent than their predecessors. They were no longer simple laborers who merely carried out instructions. They had the capacity to learn, to adjust to varying circumstances, and to sustain themselves. Most significantly, they now possess the ability to reproduce on their own. This meant they no longer had to be fashioned over and over again. They could expand their numbers independently. If this reading of the ancient records holds any truth, then it marks the most significant turning point in the entire human journey. For the very first time, humans were becoming something beyond a labor force. They were transforming into a growing, developing species. That was the moment everything shifted direction. And from within that transformation emerged a figure referred to as Adapa, the first of the upgraded human beings. Among all the humans who came after Enki's interventions, one stood apart from the rest. His name was Adapa. Across many ancient writings, Adapa is not treated as an ordinary person, but rather as something altogether distinct. Certain texts describe him as the most exceptional among all humans, while others speak of him as someone carrying a remarkable depth of understanding. He was not brought into existence simply to labor or take commands. He had the capacity to think for himself, to reason, to comprehend, and to guide those around him. He could speak with purpose and make meaningful choices. That is precisely why so many regard him as the first of a new kind of human. According to Sumerian tradition, Enki had granted him a level of wisdom that was simply beyond the reach of ordinary people. But here is where things get genuinely interesting. Adapa received knowledge, yet complete freedom was never part of the arrangement. He could grasp many truths, but certain boundaries were still firmly placed around him. Because of this, his story reads as a deep tension between understanding and liberty. Then a moment arrived that would reshape everything for him. The stories tell us that Adapa was called to stand before Anu, the god who ruled over the heavens. For any human, being summoned into the divine court was considered an extraordinary privilege. When Adapa appeared before Anu, offerings connected to everlasting life were set in front of him. Had he accepted them, eternal existence could have been his. However, before setting out on that journey, Enki had given him a firm warning. Regardless of what was offered, he was not to consume anything placed before him. Adapa followed his creator's instruction without hesitation. Even as immortality was laid right there in front of him, he turned it away. He did precisely what he had been directed to do, and that one choice altered not only his own path, but the course of all human life. The chance at eternal life passed by, and from that point forward, death became woven permanently into the human condition. Following the account of Adapa, the Sumerian tablets introduce yet another significant turning point. This transformation was not limited to humanity alone. It also touched the gods themselves, the very beings these ancient accounts describe as having fashioned humankind. When AI systems cross-referenced the available records, a pattern emerged suggesting that not every god held the same vision for where humans were headed. Two figures in particular keep coming up time and again, Enki and Enlil. Based on these accounts, Enki recognized something valuable in human beings. He held the belief that with access to knowledge, humans were capable of learning, developing, and making their world better. He had no desire to see them remain simply as laborers or servants. Perhaps this is the very reason he is often portrayed as a protector and advocate of humanity. Enlil, however, appears to have held a strikingly different perspective. For him, what mattered above all else was maintaining order. He was of the view that humans ought to receive only as much knowledge as was required to carry out their duties. Should they gain too much independence or too much understanding, they could grow harder to manage. For this reason, he consistently supported the idea of keeping firm boundaries in place. This is precisely where the tension between freedom and control takes root. On one hand, Enki wished to see humans flourish and progress, while on the other, Enlil preferred to keep them within clearly drawn lines. As time passed, this difference of opinion grew into a broader debate about the entire future of the human race. A number of clay tablets point to certain communities being introduced to farming. They were shown how to place seeds into the earth and cultivate food. Some individuals were initiated into the practice of writing, enabling them to record and preserve information across generations. Still others were introduced to working with metals, crafting instruments, and developing what we now call metallurgy. Yet this knowledge was not distributed evenly across all people. Certain groups received considerably more than others, while some were confined strictly to the roles they had been assigned. This is precisely why many scholars link these narratives to the concept of guided or controlled development. It almost gives the impression that human advancement was being permitted to move forward only to a carefully managed degree. If these interpretations hold any weight, then the earliest chapters of human history were not simply a tale of growth and progress. They were also a tale of struggle, a clash between knowledge, authority, and the desire to maintain control. And as that struggle deepened, a fateful decision took shape, one that would alter the course of everything. The Great Cataclysm. Was there a deliberate effort to bring an end to humanity as the human population kept expanding and people continued accumulating knowledge? The tensions running through the divine order began to intensify as well. According to Sumerian accounts, Enlil in particular grew deeply unsettled by these shifts. Across many ancient texts, he is portrayed as the enforcer of structure and order. In his eyes, humans had been shaped for one clear purpose, yet that purpose was slipping away. People were no longer simply carrying out their assigned tasks. They were learning, evolving, and standing more on their own than ever before. The stories tell us that human numbers began rising at a remarkable pace. Settlements grew into cities, farming spread across wider lands, and human civilization became far more structured and organized than it had ever been. While certain gods regarded this as something to welcome, Enlil saw it as cause for serious concern. It is said he came to believe that humanity had begun pushing well past the boundaries originally drawn for them. This is the point at which the Great Flood enters the story. Numerous Sumerian tablets speak of an overwhelming deluge intended to sweep the world clean. Some researchers interpret this as a kind of reset, a calculated effort to bring humanity back to nothing and begin again. According to these accounts, Enlil resolved that humankind needed to be entirely removed and the existing order rebuilt from scratch. scratch. Yet the story does not conclude there. Standing on the opposite side, Enki remained a steadfast ally to humanity. When word of the approaching catastrophe reached him, he is said to have quietly passed a warning to one particular human. In Sumerian records, that individual is referred to as Zusudra. In later Akkadian tradition, the very same figure is known as Utnapishtim. Many have come to believe that this account eventually laid the foundation for the biblical story of Noah. Enki, according to the ancient accounts, gave him clear instructions to construct an enormous vessel. He was told that a devastating flood was on its way, one powerful enough to wipe out everything in existence. For that reason, he had to ensure the safety of his family, a select group of people, and all the vital essentials needed to keep life going. Then at last, that day came. Water fell heavily from the skies, rivers burst beyond their banks, and vast stretches of land were swallowed beneath the rising waves. According to the Sumerian writings, this was no mere act of nature, but a calculated choice aimed at wiping humanity from the face of the earth. Yet because of the warning Enki had given, a number of people managed to survive. Once the waters slowly pulled back, the world that remained looked nothing like before. The ancient cities were gone, and a whole new era was ready to begin. The survivors became the foundation upon which future generations would be built. That is the reason humanity was not entirely lost and its journey was able to press onward. The riddle of forgotten knowledge. Following the tale of the Great Flood, yet another puzzle surfaces within the Sumerian tablets, and it may well be the most debated aspect of the whole account. Certain translations, processed with the help of artificial intelligence, contain passages that feel strikingly out of place among typical mythological stories. They describe things that give the impression the ancient authors were writing about sophisticated technology. Some of those texts speak of vessels capable of traveling through the air. These are described as crafts built with wings fashioned from both wood and metal. Perhaps the most striking detail is that certain passages suggest these craft did not rely solely on wind for movement, but were instead driven by some kind of internal fire or energy source. From a contemporary standpoint, some researchers attempt to read these descriptions as references to flying machines or highly advanced devices, though no firm proof has yet been found to back up that interpretation. In a comparable way, certain tablets describe a metal being placed inside a heat-holding container with the description bearing a resemblance to something not unlike molten material. Scattered across several locations, there are also mentions of heat-bearing vessels and structures that appear linked to the generation of power. For a long time, these passages were treated as nothing more than poetic expression. But once AI began connecting different records to one another, the very same pattern kept showing up repeatedly. Certain texts also speak of an overwhelming light that scorched the earth. One passage describes an entire city being wiped out within a single day. Another tells of mountains being torn apart and cracked open from within. Because of this, some people draw connections between these accounts and concepts resembling directed energy devices. Mainstream scholars, however, continue to read them as records of natural catastrophes or symbolic storytelling. But what stands out most is not the technology itself, it is how that knowledge moved through the world. Records pieced together by AI suggest that this knowledge was never distributed evenly across humanity. Certain groups were granted access to specialized understanding, while others were deliberately shut out from it. Some communities were introduced to metalworking, others learned writing and farming, while some remained confined to physical labor alone. If these readings hold up, then knowledge itself functioned as a kind of power. Those who held more of it gained greater authority and influence over others. Those who were denied it stayed dependent and reliant on those above them. This is precisely why many researchers have come to believe that in the ancient world, technology served not just as a means of advancement, but as an instrument of control. Were different human groups intentionally shaped to be separate from one another? As AI continued linking and examining various Sumerian tablets, yet another unexpected pattern started to take shape. Many of these texts did not describe humanity as one unified group. Rather, it appeared as though distinct human groups had been prepared with specific roles and duties in mind. This explains why certain distinctive terms surface again and again throughout the records, with their true meanings still being argued over to this day. In some passages, there are direct references to something called the clay of strength. Among those described in the ancient records, certain groups were associated with strenuous physical effort. Various interpretations link them to extracting materials from the ground and completing large-scale construction undertakings. These groups, it is said, were directed toward drawing resources from the earth and executing demanding building projects. Then there are references to what some call the blood of radiance. These individuals carried responsibilities tied to knowledge, sacred rituals, and religious observance. They appear as priests, keepers of written records, and watchers of the heavens. It seems they were granted access to more information and enjoyed considerably greater privileges than the rest. There are also mentions of those referred to as the shadow people. Certain records describe them as communities tasked with tending to animals and handling routine, everyday duties. They were deliberately kept at a distance from particular locations and from specific kinds of knowledge. What makes this even more thought-provoking is that several texts appear to describe distinct physical traits belonging to these different groups. Some passages speak of people marked by prolonged exposure to the sun. Others mention individuals with lighter complexions, while still others describe people who dwelled across difficult, unforgiving terrain. Even so, it remains uncertain whether these were genuine physical distinctions or merely symbolic ways of describing something else entirely. When AI analysis was applied, yet another striking detail emerged. Some groups were permitted to learn language and the art of writing, while others were denied that access entirely. Certain individuals were taught astronomy so they could interpret the movements of celestial bodies across the sky. Other groups, however, were confined strictly to whatever labor had been assigned to them. Knowledge, it appears, was never shared equally among all people. Yet the most puzzling element of Sumerian civilization goes beyond the stories of human beginnings or the accounts involving divine figures. The deeper mystery may actually rest in the warnings they chose to leave behind for those who would come after them. Many translations supported by AI suggest that the Sumerians were not simply documenting the events of their own era, but were also continuously and deliberately keeping their gaze fixed upon the sky above. In the ancient city of Ur, and later across Babylon, temple priests and sky observers documented stars, planets, and eclipses across many generations. What makes this truly striking is that they possess no modern instruments whatsoever, and yet they diligently noted even the slightest shifts occurring in the heavens above. For these people, the sky was far more than a beautiful spectacle to admire. It functioned almost like an elaborate system of coded messages. Among all those records, one particular name surfaces over and over again: Nibiru. According to certain interpretations, Nibiru was an extraordinary celestial object. It is sometimes referred to as a crossing body, said to travel along an enormously extended cycle, returning approximately every 3,600 years. Though mainstream science does not recognize this idea, references to Nibiru keep emerging throughout Sumerian writings. Perhaps the most fascinating detail is that certain tablets do not describe Nibiru merely as a planet. It is also referred to as the destroyer and the light blocker. These descriptions have left researchers puzzled for generations. Was this portraying an actual astronomical occurrence, or was it purely a symbolic kind of warning? Even now, nobody holds a definitive answer to that question. So what exactly did artificial intelligence reveal to us? After considering this entire account, the most pressing question becomes clear. What precisely did AI uncover that ignited such widespread debate across the world? Did it expose some hidden secret, or did it simply draw connections between things that had been right before us for thousands of years? What stands out is that AI invented none of these narratives. It produced no new tablets, nor did it compose any revised version of history. It simply gathered thousands of scattered, broken fragments and linked them together. For centuries, scholars had examined individual tablets in isolation. One researcher held one piece, another held something entirely different. But once AI began processing all of these records simultaneously, patterns began emerging that had never been clearly visible before. Stories that once seemed disconnected suddenly appeared to be components of a far grander and more unified picture. And this is precisely where the long-standing debate between myth and historical record truly begins. Some researchers contend that what we are dealing with here are old myths expressed through symbolic imagery. From their perspective, tales involving gods, distinct human groups, and Nibiru ought not to be read as literal accounts. At the same time, there are those who feel these narratives may carry echoes of genuine ancient understanding that slowly transformed into mythology across the centuries. When you set these stories side by side with archaeological findings and the broader sweep of human history, certain questions grow even more compelling. How exactly did people so suddenly grasp the concept of farming? How did written language emerge and spread with such remarkable speed? Why do nearly identical flood narratives keep showing up across entirely separate civilizations? And why do certain pivotal moments in human history remain points of genuine disagreement among scholars, even today? Questions like these are what drive some people toward the theory of deliberate creation. Their view is that humanity's development may not have unfolded by pure chance alone. Perhaps some guiding intention or underlying design was at work behind it all. Others, of course, dismiss this line of thinking as little more than imaginative storytelling rooted in mythological tradition. As for what the actual truth is, nobody can claim to know with any real confidence. Along similar lines, the theory of a structured control system continues to draw considerable interest. The tablets reference again and again the allocation of knowledge, the assignment of distinct roles, and the existence of separate human groups. Certain individuals were granted access to deeper understanding, while others remained deliberately restricted. If these accounts amount to something beyond straightforward mythology, they appear to outline a framework in which not every person was meant to occupy the same position. Ultimately, the judgment rests with you. Are these simply the stories of an ancient world? Or is there something far more layered concealed within them that we have yet to genuinely grasp? If these tablets, thousands of years old, truly describe human beings fashioned for different purposes, the question worth sitting with is this: are we still living inside that original design, or have we somehow stepped beyond it? So where do you stand on all of this? Do you believe these ancient tablets carry a hidden truth, or are they mythology and nothing more? Go ahead and share your thoughts down in the comments. If this video brought you joy, please like and share it.